Hey budget gardeners, Vita Loca here. Join me today as I share my seed starting successes as well as failures. So let's go. I call them failures, but are they really failures when it comes to gardening? I feel like they're lessons learned, things that we don't want to do in the future or things that we want to modify. But nevertheless, I wanted to share what I learned this past season when it came to seed starting, things I want to continue as well as things that I want to change. I'm in my shed. I spend a lot of time in here, especially this time of year when I'm potting up different plants. I have a backyard plant nursery where I sell plants, but I also have a place in that nursery where I like to overwinter plants that I'm thinking about and I don't want to put in my landscape right away. And then later in the season, next year, maybe the year after, I can go in that nursery and I can basically shop my yard to add plants in different parts of my garden. While I'm chatting with you, I'm going to be potting up some balloon flower that I winter sowed. If you don't know what winter sowing is, I'll put a link to the playlist down below. It's full of lots of winter sowing videos. I'll be potting up my plants in small 3-inch pots that I got from a local garden center. For plant labels, I'm going to be using plastic knives that I like to cut in half, and I'll be using a garden marker to label those knives. I like garden markers because they don't wear off as easily. And for the soil, it's basically used potting mix, and it's mixed with homemade compost. When it comes to starting plants indoors from seed, I've been doing it for probably 25 years now. And I have to tell you, every single year I learn something about the seed starting process. I think actually that's the beauty of gardening, be it winter sowing, starting plants indoors from seed, having indoor plants, having outdoor plants, be it perennials or annuals. There is just always so much to learn in the world of gardening. And when you think about it, what other hobby can you do that you can always learn something new pretty much your whole entire life? I think that's a big reason why I love to garden. And before I begin, I did want to mention I have a lot of videos on my channel having to do with starting seeds indoors. And what I'll do is put a link to that playlist down below. Feel free now or even during the winter months, if you're binge watching my channel, to go through that playlist because there's a lot of really great information in there. And I don't want to repeat a lot of what's already out there. Instead, I want to focus this video more on my seed starting process and things that worked for me, things that didn't work for me this past year. Something that worked for me and that I'm going to continue doing again is starting plants that I can really use out in my landscape from seed in order to save money. And some of those plants that I'm definitely going to be starting from seed, and I'm going to be starting a lot of them, include impatiens, wax begonias, coleus, alyssum, trailing lobelia, gomphrena, which was a new one for me this past year and was such a fun plant to grow from seed. And for a vegetable, I definitely will be growing tomatoes again because they're such an easy plant to grow from seed, and there's so many different kinds out there. But while we're talking about tomatoes, I will mention something that I will not be doing again this year, and that will be starting so many tomato plants from seed. Even though I have a backyard plant nursery and I do sell plants, what I found was because I had started way too many tomato plants from seed, I ended up having to donate a bunch of them. And that's not a bad thing. I really do love donating my time. I love donating plants when it comes to gardening. However, on the same token, that's a lot of real estate under my grow lights. That's a lot of time when it comes to uppotting, when it comes to watering, fertilizing. So even though I will be growing tomatoes from seed and a lot of different varieties of tomatoes, I'm going to cut down the amount of tomato seeds that I start indoors. When I first started gardening, I didn't really go on the internet a lot. I don't even know if it was around, to be honest with you, 30 years ago, but nevertheless, that's beside the point. I also really didn't go on YouTube probably until the last like 8 years or 7 years, I'd say. So I just gardened in my little world, in my little space. And the only thing I knew about gardening was what I saw when I went to public gardens or what I saw when I went to other people's gardens, or even if I went to a garden center. And that was my world of gardening and getting inspiration, coupled with books. I used to love to look through books and look at pictures. But now, because we have YouTube or we have Instagram, basically all these different social media platforms, it's so nice to also broaden our horizons and look at other people's gardens and what they're doing. And so that same thing applies when it comes to seed starting. We can look at so many different platforms and get ideas in terms of seed starting and different plants to start from seed, and when to start those different plants. And one thing that I've learned about myself, and I'm not sure if you fall into the same boat, is it's so easy to get influenced by the influencer. And I've said that before in my videos. Try not to get influenced by the influencer. And that starts with me. If you see me starting a plant, a particular plant from seed, and I'll give an example. Let's say impatiens. It might be a plant that you want to start from seed, and that's great. But then you find out you have no shade in your yard whatsoever, 0 shade areas. In that case, now what are you going to do with all these plants that you started from seed that really thrive in a shady situation? Or let's say that you do have a shady spot in your yard and you watched my video on starting impatiens from seed, and then you started those seeds, but you started them very, very late in the game. And unfortunately, the plants never amounted to much. That can be a problem as well. So I guess what I'm saying is when you are following along with anyone, including myself, in terms of seed starting, think really hard. Can you use that flower in your landscape? Or can you use that vegetable? Will you eat it? Will anyone in your family eat it? That is so important because I know that I started a whole bunch of onions this year, and this is another lesson learned and a thing that I'm not going to do. I started a lot of onions from seed, and unfortunately, I really didn't do much of anything with them. I'm the only one in my family actually that eats onions, so it doesn't really make a lot of sense for me to start hundreds of onion plants from seed. And even though I have a plant nursery, I can tell you hardly anyone wanted to buy onion starts. So it's just a plant that I definitely will not be starting again from seed, even though I love to watch a lot of YouTube channels and I'll see a lot of people starting onions from seed. For me, it's just not a practical vegetable to grow from seed. Also, the other thing to keep in mind when it comes to seed starting is to take into account your average last frost date. That is really important in the world of seed starting. So no matter what you're watching or what you're reading, always know what your average last frost date is and then start your seeds according to that. Because it's so easy to see a video that says seeds that you should start now. That doesn't always apply to my situation or your situation. And especially if you're new to seed starting, you definitely want to do a little bit of homework and research on your end to see, well, is that true? Does that really apply to you? Something that's worked well for me for a number of years is having documentation, basically somewhere where I'm keeping a track or keeping log of different seeds that I want to start, how many weeks before my last frost date I have to start those seeds, and then logging inside of that spreadsheet, when did I start those seeds? And then looking back and seeing, do I need to start the seeds a little bit earlier or a little bit later the following year? So it's nice to keep some sort of a gardening journal or a log and reference that, because you don't want to be following along necessarily with everyone else that you're watching on social media and starting seeds when they're starting seeds. Really, the only time you can do that is if you both share the same average last frost date, not the same zone. Because gardening zone is totally different than your average last frost date when it comes to seed starting. You definitely want to be looking at the average last frost date and matching up your seed starting schedule based on that. So that worked really well for me. But I can tell you, when I was very new to gardening, I used to just start a whole bunch of seeds indoors around the same time, and I didn't really pay attention to the back of the seed packet. I didn't pay attention to how many weeks before my average last frost date different plants needed to be started. And that's something that just comes over time. You learn that over time when it comes to gardening. Another thing that I'll definitely be doing again this year will be using recycled pots and containers. That works really well for me. I don't necessarily feel like I need to buy anything fancy or expensive. I feel like my plants don't know the difference, but my wallet would know the difference. It would be pretty expensive. If I had a very small amount of seeds I was starting, then sure, then I could go ahead and invest in something nicer in terms of pots and containers and trays. But because I start so many plants from seed, I prefer to basically just reuse my pots and containers each year. And I'm able to get a lot of pots and containers, like I mentioned, like these ones here, for free anyway. But with that said, if I was to invest a little bit of money, I may end up buying sturdier 10 by 20 trays, the long trays that all my pots and containers go in. A few of you have suggested some places that I could shop and buy some sturdier trays. So I may end up just investing in those. Another thing I'm definitely going to be doing again this year is starting plants from seed that I collected myself. And if you're wondering about how to collect seeds from different plants, because this is very timely, this is the time of year in the late summer, early fall, when I really start collecting seeds from various annual and perennial plants as well as vegetables. So if you want to do the same thing, I will put a link to that playlist down below where I have lots of videos that show you what to look for when collecting seeds. So a common question that I get asked is, when you collect the seeds from plants, will the plants that get formed be true to the parent plant? And I usually do answer that question, and I'll tell you the answer in a minute. But one of the things I want to say about that is, as a home gardener, how important is that to you individually? And that's very important to think about. As a home gardener, for me, that is not very important. So I'll give some examples. I love to collect the seeds from my begonias, from my impatiens, from my coleus, from my trailing lobelia, from my gomphrena, from a whole bunch of plants. There's a whole list of them. And I don't mind if the plants are a little bit different from each other, that there's a little bit of variation in the plants. It's never drastic. It's usually very slight, if anything. So as a regular home gardener, I don't mind doing that because honestly, I save so much money that way. I look at the price of seeds and they can be very expensive. So I would much prefer to collect my own seeds. Again, though, if you had a very small garden, or let's say you were selling plants as part of cut flowers, then it might be important for you to get plants that all look identical to a parent plant. But when you are shopping for plants, if the plant tag or label or on the internet, if it says that it's open pollinated or if that it's heirloom, then those are plants that will be true to the parent plant. But if you buy something that says it's a hybrid or some sort of a cross, then in that case, a lot of times the seeds that get produced will not be identical to the parent plant. So that's just something to know. Something that was really awesome this year that worked out great for me was the fact that I hardly had any fungus gnats in my indoor seed starting situation, which my whole seed starting setup is right next to my kitchen. So I don't want a whole bunch of little flies flying around in my kitchen, to be honest with you. And I've dealt with fungus gnats, and it's not fun. And if you've ever dealt with fungus gnats, then you know what I'm talking about. So the big thing that I changed for this year was that every single time I watered from day one, I didn't wait until I saw the fungus gnats. From day one, I started watering with mosquito bits mixed into my water. So even if I was bottom watering my plants, they were getting mosquito bits mixed in with the water. So if you had issues when it came to fungus gnats, then you might want to do something similar to that as well. And I'm not sure if I've ever made a video that talks specifically about that. And if I did, I'll put a link to it down below. But follow along with me this year when I'm doing seed starting, and I'll be sure to show you my process for that. The big takeaway on that is just to know that if you want to avoid the fungus gnat issue, water every single time using the mosquito bits that's mixed into your water. Something else that I'm definitely going to be doing again this year is my DIY seed starting mix as well as potting mix. That really has worked well for me. And I've tried a lot of different things in the past, and it gets pretty expensive when you start buying your own seed starting mix, your own potting mix. It really adds up. And again, this is especially true if you're starting a lot of seeds like I start. And in fact, a lot of the videos that I've made when it comes to seed starting include those recipes. So be sure to refer back to some of my older videos where I give the ratios and recipe of what I use for seed starting. A game changer for me when it came to seed starting was starting plants under grow lights. When I first started my adventures of seed starting 25 years ago, I just used to start my seeds and put them in a sunny window, thinking that as long as they were getting some sun, they were fine. And then I had even found that I should be turning my tray around daily so that the plants don't get leggy and they're not reaching for the sun. And I really didn't know at the time, I thought that that was sufficient and that worked. And then I found out very quickly that no, that does not work. So a game changer for me was getting some sort of a grow light system in place. And I initially went on Facebook Marketplace and I bought some grow lights. And I also had received a gift from my mother-in-law of a very nice grow light system. But I found out over the years I needed more grow lights. And I was going to buy more of those grow light systems like my mother-in-law got me. It was a Gardener Supply grow light system. And I was floored at how expensive that was. And then, thanks to the internet, I was able to find DIY grow light systems that you could make yourself. And I have a video that goes into depth with my grow light system, so I'll link that down below. But the main thing to know about that is you can make a grow light system for yourself, and you can do it on a budget. You don't have to do it as fancy as I have or as fancy as anyone else has. All you need are a set of LED shop lights. And there's all this information out there about lumens and how strong the lights should be. But the main thing I want to tell you is it does not have to be a light that states that it's a quote unquote grow light. It can just be LED shop lights. And if you do want to know more about how to make your own grow light system and you watch that video that I'm going to link down below, it talks a little bit about the grow lights that I have, or I guess LED shop lights, and the lumens and all that fun stuff that you need to know about. But I do recommend that if you do want to start some plants from seed indoors, to look into the whole grow light system setup and find something that works for you, for your space and for your budget, as well as for how many plants you want to start from seed. Another thing that has worked well for me is having my rolling carts. I've shown them in previous videos. They're something that my husband put together for me, and it just makes it easier for me to start transitioning plants outside so that they can start hardening off. And that especially works out well if you don't have a greenhouse or you don't have a covered porch or anything like that. And the best part is you could even look on like something like Facebook Marketplace and you could find something that's on wheels that you can roll outside to harden off plants and then roll it back in at night when it's cold outside. One thing that I wasn't great about and I want to be better about this year has to do with pinching my annuals back. I was good about doing it with some of my annuals, but not all of my annuals. And it's one of those things that it takes time to do, but it's so important to do because you want your annuals to be nice and bushy and strong. You don't want them to be leggy. And leggy seedlings can happen for a lot of different reasons. And so that's just one of the things that would help with a leggy seedling is pinching back your seedlings so that they're nice and bushy and shorter and they'll have more flowers on them. Another thing I'm definitely going to do again that worked well for me was multi-sowing or mass sowing a bunch of seeds in small restaurant takeout containers. And I know that a lot of you tried that as well, and some of you loved it, some of you didn't love it. I think that's so important that you try things and maybe they work for you and maybe they don't. But for me, that process does work well because I have so many seeds I like to start, and I also don't want to run out of room quickly under my lights. And I know that that's a problem that we all run into is we start so many plants and we run out of room. And that's where I was talking about earlier. Don't get influenced by the influencer. Because if I start hundreds of begonias or impatiens from seed, that's because I do have a plan and I have a place where I want to put all those plants. But in your situation, you might not have that much room. So you might only need to start 20 impatient seeds or 30 impatient seeds. But what I will say about that is start enough in case you lose some, you have extras. But don't start so many and then you don't have a place to put them. Although who doesn't love giving away free plants, right? But the reality is you don't want to run out of space under your lights because then you might not have space to start the plants you really wanted to start. And speaking of plants that you wish you had started, I wish I started my basil. I didn't start my basil this year and I missed out on that. At this point, it's okay. The tomatoes are coming in and I wish I had fresh basil. But next year, I want to make sure I start my basil indoors. Another thing that I wasn't great about and I want to be better about this year was cleaning out my used container pots. I usually am really good about that. And I was trying to be good about that early in the season when I was first starting my seed starting. But there were some container pots that I got from my storage area and they were used and I had not cleaned them. And suddenly I had a whole bunch of ants in my house. And I was able to get rid of them, but it took some time. So the good news is when you use used pots, many times if there was no disease in them, then you're fine. So I didn't have any issues in terms of disease. It must have been that there was just an ant nest inside the pot. It wasn't a horrible situation, but yes, there were definitely ants crawling around my house that I had to deal with. So this year I want to be better about cleaning out those pots, and I want to do it while the weather is still warm. I don't want to do it in the late fall, early winter when it's super cold out. So that's one of my goals for this year. Something that I've been doing for years, and I'm going to continue doing, is when it comes to starting my perennial seeds, I'll be using the winter sowing process. I really don't like to use my indoor grow space for growing perennials. And that's because I have so many annuals that I need to start from seed or that I want to start from seed. So for that reason, I prefer to just keep all my perennials to the winter sowing process and keep all my herbs, all my vegetables, all my annual flowers indoors for under the grow lights. Although there is a perennial that I do enjoy growing indoors because it takes such a long time to grow from seed, and that's lavender. So I will be growing that perennial indoors and not using the winter sowing process. I have winter sown lavender before, and it's fine, but it definitely doesn't grow as fast for me as it would if I started them indoors. So those are the biggest things that I could think about in terms of my seed starting this past year, what worked and what didn't work. And again, because I've been doing it for a number of years, I've gotten better and tweaked my seed starting process. And that's why I didn't have a huge list of things that I won't be doing again. But I'd love to know from you, in terms of seed starting, what are some things that worked really well for you that you will repeat? And what is something or some things that you will not do again? And I just wanted to take this moment to thank each and every one of you for continuing to support me with my channel, for making comments on videos, for hitting the like button or the thumbs up button just to let me know that you like my videos, and also just for being there. I've been doing the YouTube videos for I think 3 years now. I really enjoy sharing whatever I do in my garden with you. It really means a lot to me to have your support. So thank you for that. And until the next video, make it a great day with gardening.